Welcome everyone who has decided to watch this video. We thought we would have a little discussion about how Sizewell came to be, its history and some of the work over the last 45 years, and then also share a bit about the current situation we're in with COVID-19. So I'm Matt. Some of you probably don't know me because I've only been working at Sizewell since February, and a lot of you haven't been able to join us since February. And I'm the fundraising and marketing coordinator at Sizewell. And I'm very happy to be joined by Victor Jack. Hi, Victor.
Hello, good to be with you.
Victor started Sizewell Hall, so I know a lot of you probably know who Victor is already, but yeah, we're very excited to have Victor with us. And I'm also joined by Colin Lowe, who is the chair of the board of trustees. Hi, Colin.
Hi there, Matt. Hi, thank you.
So I thought to start, we'd probably just talk a bit about the history of the hall. So Victor, I know that in the 60s and early 70s, you and your wife Meg have been leading house parties and various other kind of church missions. Could you tell us a bit about what you were doing at that time?
Yes, it would be true to say that those early years of our ministry in Suffolk were particularly fruitful, largely because everybody had been to Sunday school, a large number of people had been to church, and they were taught the Bible in schools. And so when we had our 500-seater marquee, which we erected in every town in Suffolk, and some places we went back to more than once, we always had the marquee packed with children and young people, as well as the adult events that we run. And it was wonderful looking out on a sea of faces of young people who were keen and eager to learn. And we were privileged to see quite a number of those young people commit their lives to God. So we wanted to keep in touch with them, obviously, and to see their faith grow and develop. So we began week-long house parties in places like Culford School, Hengrave Hall, and St. Felix School, Southwold. And we had huge numbers coming to those long week house parties during the Easter holidays. We had as many as 220 coming to Culford School. And they were wonderful times of Bible teaching, a lot of fun. And we saw some of those young people go on to take places as ministers in churches and some serving God overseas. And then one day when I was walking through the fields where I lived in a little village called Drinkston for 50 years, I had what I called my prayer trails. And one day when I was walking out and praying, I sensed God put it in my heart, the need to find a place that we could use more permanently, because we could only use schools in holiday periods and just Easter and the summer. And so we began to pray and to think this through. And I put my name down on about 12 different estate agents' lists and asked them to let me know if any large premises became available. And we looked at several of these potential buildings, but none of them were suitable. So we just stepped back and said, God, we put this into your hands, and carried on praying.
So you kind of identified that need for a permanent centre, but how did you actually come across Sizewell Hall in the state that it was at that time?
Well, I knew of it because I went to school in Leiston and I knew it existed. But it was in 1974, a lady who was a good artist asked permission to go into the grounds to paint the hall. And she was talking to the caretaker and discovered that the building was empty and available to be rented. And so she notified me, and I wrote off immediately to Mr. Ogilvy, the owner of Sizewell Hall. He replied almost by return of post and said that he was willing to negotiate with us. Well, I'd attended Leiston Grammar School with several of my brothers, and we were nearly all up on speech day receiving prizes. And the person we shook hands with was Mr. Ogilvy, who was chairman of the school governors. So he knew the family from the first, and he didn't ask for any references. He just said, you know, the place is yours if you would like to take it over. Sadly, he died shortly after that with a sudden heart attack. And so the final negotiations were done with his son, Glenn, and we worked with him in order to take over the place. And I didn't go it alone. I set up a group of trustees, which I felt was important. Business people, we had a lawyer and we had a solicitor. And they came with me to visit the hall for the first time. And it was very Spartan. It looked like a haunted manor. and we knew it had a lot of work to be done on it, but they were unanimous that we should go ahead. And so we committed ourselves as a group of people to go ahead with the whole project.
It's weird to hear about, the state that the hall was in to begin with. I know that, yeah, as you said, it had been empty for quite a while. So I'd imagine it would require quite big task forces to get it all sorted.
Yes, well, it's interesting that I actually signed the lease with Mr. Ogilvy in the Angel Hotel in Bury St Edmunds. And all I had in the bank at that time was £40. And that had been sent to me by a friend in Bristol who had heard what we were thinking of doing. And then a businessman from Eastbourne, he heard what we were doing and he came up to visit the place and he looked it over. He was a builder himself. And he said, it's structurally well built, go for it. And he offered us £1,000 to open an account there and then, which in those days was quite a considerable sum of money. So that was the first sign of many that God was with us in the whole project. And as you've already said, the hall hadn't been lived in for 13 years. So the buildings looked like a haunted manor. I remember seeing a rat going up the ivy to try and get into the buildings. And I eventually sent a letter out to people in the area. And I had many contacts at that time saying we needed help to get this building refurbished. And the response was amazing. On some Saturdays, between 40 and 60 people would turn up. Farmers came with chainsaws and tractors and trailers. One farmer left his JCB there for several weeks. And we had a team of ladies who came regularly, cleaning, painting, making curtains and pillow slips. And one lady who some would consider being rather aristocratic in style, I found her on her knees by one of the toilets with a knife, scraping off the accumulated scale. And that picture of her doing that will forever be etched on my memory. But it was just symbolic of the great willingness of people to come and help and to serve. We had some huge expenses. The whole building needed to be electrically rewired. A large boiler had to be installed and a considerable amount of plumbing dealt with. Then came the battles with the fire authorities who made some demands that we felt were unreasonable. But we worked it through with them. And then we had to even split doors in half in order to put fire preventing material in the middle. But it was wonderful how God brought people to us. As a result of working in Lowestoft, a Christian building company gave us a massive amount of help. And can you believe it? They didn't send a bill in for 2 years. And when they did, it was only a fraction of what the original cost would have been. And then we had another Christian furnishing builder who heard what we were doing, and they supplied so many carpets. And again, they did that at cost. And during those years, we had huge bills to pay, but every single bill was paid every month. And so we just thank God for his faithfulness in that.
Yeah, it's so clear to see God's hand in getting the hall ready, and I'm sure that in those early years as well, as the work grew, that there was ways that God worked through the people in the hall itself.
Yeah, I think looking back, the work grew and expanded at a rate we hadn't anticipated. Everyone who came loved the idyllic situation of the hall on the edge of the beach, surrounded by trees, and it was quite possible to create a very homely atmosphere in the building. And within 2 or 3 years, all the weekends and holidays were fully booked. And the word spread far and wide. And so great was the demand that people were coming from Liverpool and Birmingham and London, as well as the local area. And so we made a policy decision that we would make the place available in the main for East Anglia, so that we could bless the churches and the youth groups in East Anglia, and then fit in other groups who came from further afield when there was space available. And many groups in East Anglia sort of booked a weekend and they said, that's our weekend. And they jealously guarded it and came on that weekend every year. And of course, when we had improvements to make, they were always the first to contribute because it was for their benefit as well. But then came the challenge to fill some of the midweek periods. And I was tackled by an Irish lady who said to me one day, you do all these things for young people. What about us oldies? So on the spur of the moment, I said, all right, we'll run a holiday specially for you. And so we started a midweek break for over 50s. And they were so popular that they ran on year after year. And at one stage, we had 6 of those groups running a year. So I don't have the time really today to record all the things that God did in people's lives, but we saw so many come to faith. We saw people baptized in the sea. We saw marriages healed. We saw relationships restored, and others met their future partners there. So amazing how many fellows and girls met the person that they would do to marry. And I went through taking so many weddings every year. I remember I took 14 weddings one year alone, and many of those had met their partner in that lovely Christian environment.
Yeah, and obviously those stories have kept coming throughout the last 45 years. I've heard so many stories of the ways that it's impacted people. And I wondered whether either of you wanted to share any kind of specific stories that have stood out in your minds from the last 45 years that Sizewell Hall has been running.
Well, where do you begin? I'd like to begin really by talking about the men's weekends that we initiated. And I think of one man who came to faith there 20 years ago. And can you believe it? He still comes back every year to recommit his life to God and kind of revisit the place. And he's got a leading role in a church now on the South Coast. And another man just more recently committed his life to God with many tears. It was a very deep conversion. And his wife had been converted at Portman Road in Ipswich in 1984 when Billy Graham held his mission there. And she'd prayed for him for 34 years. And we saw him come to faith. And another man who was recently out of prison came for a weekend. And he too was impacted by the teaching. He committed his life to God. And then he came back to help with practical work. And he rebuilt part of the sea wall. And there are just so many stories, but I'll start with those few.
Yeah, I guess I've sort of got a couple of different arrangements. So one is when Mel and I, my wife and I, were running youth work, and we saw nearly every time we ran our church's youth weekend away, someone would either be restored back to a relationship with God or come to him for the first time. And that in itself was remarkable. But over recent years, the house parties that Victor is referring to, we've taken those on. And in a very different way, we've seen God at work with people who are towards the later years in their life. And just to see them find the opportunity to come away from perhaps a time of loneliness or being alone, certainly, and to have an opportunity to share with other people, or to have very difficult conversations with people who recognize that perhaps their mental abilities weren't what they once were, and to have those open conversations with them, but yet their complete confidence in knowing that whatever happened to their physical body, that they spiritually were one with Christ. And that's just been a wonderful experience to see and to be a part of. And it's probably just that opportunity of coming away from everyday life, which Sizewell Hall gives, that really has been of huge importance to us.
I think too, because of the community spirit that's created there, that people who come for the first time are just amazed at the love and the sense of fellowship that they experience. They're just overwhelmed by it. They've never known anything quite like it before, especially people who've got no Christian backgrounds. And it's just been wonderful to see them grow and to flourish, and even in tears when they leave, not wanting to go home. It's quite amazing. And it's a place where many people surface their problems. They've been lying buried. And we've had such lovely opportunities to pray with people and see God's healing take place. And of course, one of the joys always is to see people who surrender their lives to him and end up going into different forms of Christian ministry as well. So it's just been a rich and wonderful experience.
And I think that's the thing that's really helpful there, isn't it, Victor, that nothing's hurried
Exactly.
while you're there. In our everyday lives, we rush from one activity to another, or we have certain things that are in the diary or commitments we need to fulfill. But I think when we're there, we set the time aside and people can just sit and talk, but most importantly, they can listen.
Yeah.
And I just find that people can just become part of a conversation where they open up and they share, and they understand they're not alone. They understand that there are people who can give them support. And perhaps most importantly, they can be brought back into the joys of fellowshipping with God and God's people.
Yeah, I mean, I think Martin said it in the recent video that we put out, that, you know, people will come through those gates and drive down that driveway, and the worries of the rest of the world kind of leave them behind. I know that youth camps and family camps have been a big part of the work at Sizewell Hall, and I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how that kind of partnership with Suffolk Christian Camps started and the history of camps at Sizewell Hall.
Well, the Suffolk Christian Camp started when I was a teenager, and they started, can you believe it, on my father's farm at Rendham Hall near Saxmundham. And they were great days. And then they moved when the farm was sold to Theberton. And then when Sizewell opened, it was natural for them to think in terms of coming to the campsite that we'd created at the hall. And it's been a very happy arrangement for many years. And those summer camps are just so popular. And I know in our own church, whenever young people are being baptized and giving their testimonies, they always refer to Sizewell Hall. And that was the place that made an impact on their lives, where they felt they had to surrender their lives to God and start following him. So the camps have been a great blessing over many years.
Yeah, just reinforce that fact. The lovely thing is they're independent, they're their own organisation, but they're a very important partnership for us. And yeah, they have a slot every summer, and that's their place. And it's a real joy to drive up that drive, as you said, Matt, come up that drive and just look when they're there to see the place full with children, or later on in the summer with families. And just to see so many people making use of the facilities, and the fact that individuals come back year after year after year, or families come back year after year, is just such a huge support of the work which they do. And we're very privileged to have them on site.
I was in the office a little while ago, and I got given a little leaflet that had pictures of the hall through the years, and I saw a photo of the dishwasher that's in the washing room, and it's still the same dishwasher from so many years ago. And it made me think about how, you know, there are lots of aspects of the hall that have changed over the years, and but also, you know, aspects of a stay at Sizewell Hall that have stayed the same. So I wonder if you had any thoughts on the way that Sizewell has changed over the years.
Yes, I think looking back, when it first started, all the administration was done in our office at Drinkston. All the bookings, all the group bookings, because our first manager said, don't ask me to do that because I'll book 2 groups in at once. So I said, all right, we'll do that. And then I had an excellent secretary in Ella Miles, and she did all the financial arrangements, paid all the bills, paid the staff, and looked after all the VAT. And how we did that for 30 years through our office, on top of all the other missions and conferences I was speaking at, I just don't know. But of course, as the work progressed, we had to take on board other people. We did have a wonderful accountant in Mervyn Wood and a very good solicitor in Tony Lee. And when we started, we had just one manager, and that was Don G and his lovely wife, Heather. And they were followed by Mike and Janet Stafford, who were later invited to go and work at Torch Trust. And then the longest standing managers of all were Paul and Carol Golding, who did a brilliant job. And we shall always be grateful to them and to all our managers, because it's a demanding role and a rewarding one as well. But as the hall became increasingly busy, we had to increase staff. And so Peter and Lynn Warnock came, and they were involved in assisting and helping in other practical ways as well. But it's just amazing how the work grew. And I remember at one stage we had 40 groups on the waiting list. And those early years, it was just amazing how people came. But we did have to adapt to the increasing demand.
Yeah, just following on from what Victor said, obviously Ella stayed on supporting the trustees until only this spring just gone. So Ella's service for the hall was just remarkable, and we're very grateful for all that she has done for us. And we wish her well in this new stage in her life, which is not having to think about Sizewell Hall, which must be an amazing time for her. But yeah, the staff situation has changed, Matt, as you yourself know, joining earlier on this year, in that we took the opportunity when there were some changes taking effect anyway, a couple of years ago, to just take a whole new look at what we did and the roles and the responsibilities and the people that we needed. So that's been a really good thing to see, that we've got someone specialist in accounts looking after the accounts, someone looking after bookings, yourself looking after marketing and fundraising, and then Paul looking after the grounds and the estate and ensuring that the building is in good condition. And all of those things are important, and to be able to bring in specialists in each of those areas has been hugely helpful. But that probably has been one of the biggest changes over the last few years.
How does the role of the trustees kind of fit into that that whole collective team of staff and trustees?
Well, just listening to Victor's experience, which never fails to just excite me about just what has happened over 45 years. Back then, I guess, the board was essentially the group that got everything happening. So they made it all happen. They were often there physically. They were, cutting grass or hedges or whatever was needed. We've taken a view now that we've got specialists employed, we need to take a bit more of a step, an advisory step, if you like, being a board rather than being the workers. And although we all want to contribute something, I personally recognise how bad I am at DIY, and I really need to be kept away from anything that could just make a mess of the great work that Paul and his team do. I think our view is that, as a board, it's our responsibility to ensure that the long-term nature and the position of Sizewell Hall is really what we focus on, and the direction of travel of, the work with groups like Suffolk Christian Camps and so on is what we'll do the work with. But we just have such a good team now that we're delighted to be able to support them and help them in what they do.
I know that the whole reason that all the trustees are involved and even us as a staff team is because of, for a large part, the impact that Sizewell's had on our own lives. And I wondered if maybe you could both share a bit about how the work at Sizewell Hall has impacted your own lives specifically.
I think whenever I drive through the gates and up the drive, a phrase that's been used before, I just feel overwhelmed with thankfulness to God for his faithfulness over the years and the wonderful support of his people. God's goodness and the fellowship of other Christians has just been amazing. And I just put on record now again how grateful I am for the fellowship and sense of unity and purpose that we experienced, especially during those early days. And I just love being there in the summer when the hall is full, the campsite's full, and there are just so many people under the teaching of God's word. And seeing all that happen just fills my heart with joy and with thanksgiving. And I'm just a little sad that the African adventure that was so popular with schools is no longer functioning, largely due to lack of funds. And I do hope and pray somebody will pick that up in the future, because thousands of school children have been through that. And I met a lady on a train going to London a year or two back now, and she was telling me that her son had had the most wonderful experience, and she couldn't stop talking about it as she explained all the things he'd been doing at this place called Sizewell Hall. And I never let on that I had anything to do with it until the very end of the conversation. But there are just so many memories, and it would fill a book. But, I do have one sad memory, because whenever I walk down the steps onto the beach, I can never forget the day when I was swimming with my sons and my brother Ian, and he was inexplicably drowned. And the night before, a number of us were having a service of thanksgiving and praise that nobody got into difficulties in the sea. Nobody had had any serious injuries in the mad games we'd played in the grounds. And then that happened. And it was almost as though the enemy, when we were riding on the crest of the waves, so to speak, with all the blessing we'd been privileged to see, that he came to kind of destroy our confidence in God. But he was defeated. But I learned so many lessons through that whole experience, which I won't go into now. But the healing came very quickly when I went back to the place where I tried to resuscitate him and just said, Lord God, I don't understand why this has been allowed to happen, but I know that you know, and I just commit myself to go on serving you in the future. So I always think of that whenever I walk down onto the beach, but it does give me great peace of mind to know that he's in the presence of Jesus, whom he loved and served.
Yeah, I think that's something that just sticks with me when I very first heard that account, Victor, that for many people there's a great sense of the presence of God there. And sometimes that's been through people's hearts being broken, where we're not, not everyone's in the crest of the wave or, the peak of joy in Sizewell Hall. There are sometimes things which really challenge us about how we're living, or things where we recognize our own failings, or we see the impact of sad things on our lives. And that there is that sense, though, that that's still where God can meet us, even that through those experiences. And that's where, Victor, your personal experience there is both heartbreaking, but also a reminder to us of God's healing power to us when those great tragedies strike. But yeah, in terms of experiences that we've seen there, then yeah, I was privileged to be able to be part of a baptism on the beach on a very rough October Sunday. Thankfully, the person who was being baptized wasn't quite so tall, so we didn't need to go out quite so far. But it was just an amazing experience to be party to that, but only a small part. But yeah, the key thing really is just how we've seen over years different people from different backgrounds. And yes, this incredible thing in Suffolk that you can be present at someone giving a testimony or being baptized. And how many times do we hear the word Sizewell Hall appear in that testimony or in that account of someone's conversion? And yeah, it's a wonderful thing to just hear year after year how faithful God is.
It's amazing how many people say there is such peace in this place when they come for the first time. And this is such a peaceful place. That shouldn't surprise us because of the army of people who've prayed for the work and the ministry of Sizewell over the years. And as Tennyson said, more things are wrought by prayer than we could ever dream of. And we just are so thankful to those intercessors who prayed for the work over the years.
Yes. We took a group from our church, which was a church plant about 10 years ago. We took the first group there about 4 years ago. And I think 35 of the 60 people had not been there before on the weekend, and they were desperate to be back the following year. Yeah. Every single one of them. And yeah, there is an imprint that it leaves on our hearts and on our lives that calls people to seek that peace that it gives. And I think that's a real challenge for us.
I've been coming to Sizewell since we moved to Suffolk in 2006, but obviously I was only 11 then, so I didn't kind of have the same understanding of what was going on at that time as I did a few years later. But yeah, a few years later we came back, and actually we were on a church holiday week. It wasn't a specific teaching weekend or anything. It was more of a holiday, and one of my friends was going through quite a difficult time that week, and I was really worried for her, and I was just sat in my bedroom, and I didn't really know what I believed at that point. As growing up as a pastor's son, I had a good kind of knowledge, but I didn't know if I believed it for myself. But I was there at Sizewell, and I didn't know if God would hear me, but I thought I'd pray anyway for this situation. And so I prayed, and I had this, it's very hard to describe, but a real feeling of like warmth and peace that I hadn't ever experienced before that. And that night was a real turning point in my life, and a big part of the reason I came to faith. And so now to be working for the Hall, having gone through that experience, it's a real privilege to be working for the Hall, and to hopefully be playing a part in the Hall surviving through this pandemic and into the future.